further amendments? Mr. Simpson?
Thank you, Chairwoman. I appreciate that. I have an amendment to this, and I'd ask unanimous consent that we
Without
consider it read.
objection, the gentleman is then recognized to speak on his amendment.
Thank you. I'll be as quick as I can, but this is vitally important subject. It's the same subject that Mr. Stewart was just talking about, but I know it's late in the afternoon and nobody's listening anyway.
Oh.
But this is a debate that this Congress needs to have. It is vital to our future. As a nation, we've grown far too dependent on foreign nations to supply the minerals that we need to develop for the development of emerging clean energy technologies and for our national defense. The Biden administration has identified critical minerals as a key component of our supply chain vulnerabilities, but restrictions in place in current permitting processes have made it almost impossible to access our domestic supply of these critical minerals. And we have these critical minerals on most of our public lands. You just can't get to them because of the permitting process that's so onerous in this country. Let me read something to you. The start of it anyway, as soon as I can open my phone. Okay. This is from E&E, Energy and Environment. Energy Wire. A pro-China, listen to this. A pro-China online campaign sought to gin up opposition to rare earth minerals projects in the United States and elsewhere. According to a recent report, a new risk for auto and energy technology companies that rely on these minerals. The cybersecurity firm Mandit tracked thousands of fake social media accounts that aim to encourage protests against Western rare earth companies that China considered as a threat to their dominance of the sector. That's what's happening in this country. In fact, one China official said that if we tried to disrupt the supply chain that currently exists, they would consider that the beginning of World War III. Think about that for a minute. That's what we're facing. Now, this is not the Democrats' fault. This is not the Republicans' fault. It's all of our fault. It's something that we've known about, but we just really haven't paid a whole lot of attention to. It's important to remember that the mining practices that we see today, some people see, when you say the word mining, they think of, the 1800s when you took a fire hose and blew away the side of a mountain and filtered out the gold. The mining practices we see today are unrecognizable from mining practices of the 1800s. We have sophisticated technologies that enable us to mine resources in more environmentally responsible and efficient ways. There are also efforts underway to remine and restore areas previously degraded by past mining activities. However, our nation's permitting process obstructs and delays these efforts. This amendment would bring common sense reform to permitting critical mineral mining projects and create a more timely, transparent, and reasonable process. I know everybody talks about, let the Resources Committee do this. We've been talking about updating the mining laws for, I don't know, I've been here 24 years, and I know they've been talking about it before then. Nothing ever gets done. We need to move on this because this is critical to our country. This amendment does not remove environmental reviews of critical mineral projects. It just puts a time limit on the NEPA process. This amendment puts an 18-month limit on doing environmental assessments and a 2-year time limit on environmental impact statements. Some people will say that's not nearly enough time. Baloney. The federal government can act quickly if it wants to. You've all seen them do it. It's like the Senate. Senate can take forever to do something, or they can do something overnight. It depends on how interested they are. These are reasonable time limits for the necessary agency work, and the text included a relief valve for more complicated projects that require more time if the agency is working in good faith with the project sponsor. If adopted, this amendment would ensure timely science-based environmental reviews and permitting to encourage responsible domestic mining vital to the future of emerging technologies and our national defense. Lastly, let me just say this. From copper to nickel to silver to lithium, a wide range of minerals are absolutely essential to produce the building blocks of our energy future, and demand is growing. The World Bank Group estimates mineral production demands could increase by nearly 500% by 2050. The Center for Strategic and International Studies has cited a 1,000% jump. This is critical, and this is a debate this Congress needs to have, or we'll look back and say, we wish we had done something when we could. I yield back.
Pingree.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I claim time in opposition to this amendment. This amendment would set an arbitrary clock on these environmental assessments and impact statements without any regard to the complexity of the project. While I certainly agree with Mr. Simpson, and we do all appreciate the importance of critical minerals, that is why the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provides $64 million per year over the next 5 years for a total of $320 million for Earth MRI to identify areas with potential critical mineral resources. The Department of Interior is already streamlining permitting, but not at the expense of the environment, opportunities for public input, or ensuring a quality review that will be upheld in any litigation. On May 11, 2022, the Biden-Harris administration released a permitting action plan that will strengthen and accelerate federal permitting and environmental reviews by fully leveraging existing permitting authorities. This plan ensures that the federal environmental reviews and permitting processes are effective and transparent and guided by the best available science. The President has also authorized the use of the Defense Production Act to support responsible production of 5 critical minerals: lithium, cobalt, graphite, nickel, and manganese, that are a priority for production of minerals used for large capacity batteries. We are making significant strides to streamline the process, and setting arbitrary deadlines for completion of project reviews will adversely impact the quality of the review and the opportunities for public impact. So I oppose this amendment. I think we're working hard to make this happen. We all understand the value of critical minerals, and I yield back.
Mr. Joyce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise in strong support of the gentleman's amendment. Much of the frustration with government is the extraordinary amount of time it takes to get permits for just about everything. It is true at local levels, and it's also true at the federal level. Granted, permits are important for protecting infringement on other people's rights and protecting the environment, among other things. And many permit applications involve complicated projects requiring extensive analysis and review. The problem is when the reviewing officials have no incentive to move fast. Applicants are not paying the customers who could take their business elsewhere if they don't like the service. Reviewing officials aren't graded at the rate at which they process applications. They're not compensated for staying late on a Friday to finish up something and move it off their desk. I support this amendment because it puts a reasonable clock on the permit applications. The rate at which this administration is approving renewable energy permits fits comfortably within the time limits imposed by this amendment. So it can be done if agency personnel are sufficiently motivated and compensated for their work. I urge adoption of this amendment to help get government moving and get America back in control of its energy and mineral supplies. I yield back.
Are there any other members wishing to be heard on this amendment? Mr. Talbot.
I know it's going to be a shock to some, but the Chinese intelligence service is operating in the United States against U.S. interests. They're doing that right now. They do that every day. And one of their biggest interests is to keep the United States from being self-reliant on critical minerals. And they're doing a very good job because in spite of what was said about streamlining the permit process, no permits have been granted as far as I know. We only have one operating critical mineral facility open in the United States presently, and almost all processing of critical minerals is done outside of the United States. And guess where? China. So whatever little amount of critical minerals we do produce here, we have to send to China to have it processed. Now that makes no sense at all. This is something that we must pass. Rather than having a national emergency where we're going to have to declare an emergency and then bypass all environmental rules, or do something that's common sense and pass the Simpson Amendment, I would encourage everyone to vote aye.
Ms. McCollum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't oppose the gentleman, but I do oppose this particular amendment at this time. Most of you are well aware of a rush permitting process when we were in the middle of a scientific review to protect clean drinking water. 20% of the cleanest drinking water in the National Forest Program is up in the BWCA, the Boundary Waters Canoe area. The Trump administration decided to pull back on permits and just move all forward ahead. Said that they would issue a study, didn't issue the study. When this committee, the Interior Committee, tried to ask for a copy of what we as taxpayers had paid for. Mr. Joyce, all of us were sitting there. What did they send us? They sent us pages and pages of blank, redacted information, and they were just moving full steam ahead. Now, I want you to know that I agree with Mr. Calvert and with Mr. Simpson. It is shocking the amount of materials that are here mined in the United States, copper in particular, that's shipped over to China. And it's probably being used against us. So I hear the gentleman loud and clear. And I think Mr. Simpson is his frustration and what's happening with mining. And we heard that a little bit from Mr. Stewart too. I think there's some real basis for it. I don't discount that at all. But this is an overbroad amendment, and I think it's been brought in just because of the frustration that we are all feeling. No one here denies that we don't need to establish supply lines for critical minerals, and we need to process them here in the United States so we have control over them. But there's another critical resource, and this is the one that I brought up when there was a big rush to just move forward, and that's water. And so I really do think we need to look at these mine plans and how we move forward in a way that looks at the way we need to treat water these days. You know, in Minnesota, we never worried about water for a long time. Even in the constituency I represent, White Bear Lake, Minnesota, no, people didn't worry about it. The lake went down. The lake went down. All of a sudden, we realized we had a problem. And then we had PFAS contamination. I have numerous municipalities that have to filter all their drinking water for PFAS, and we're finding it in water all over. And so I think when it comes to water, something we typically don't put a price on unless we're at the airport, we want to buy a bottle of it. We need to straighten up and fly right when it comes to water. And so I oppose this amendment because it doesn't do, I think, the deep carve-outs that we need to do and say, what else besides minerals is a national security interest? And I think water is. And we heard debate after debate yesterday on what's happening in California. We've all watched in the news what's happening in Lake Mead. So, Mr. Simpson, I know you're well-intentioned on this, but I think you will agree with me that water is an important natural resource, and that's why I think we need to put pressure on the committees. We need to put pressure on the authorizing committees to sit down and get this right. Now, the other thing that's been pointed out is, you know, that a lot of these minerals go over to China to be processed. Well, the companies that are coming in to mine these minerals, folks, they aren't U.S. companies. They're international conglomerates. So they get the lease, they can send it wherever they want. We need a big picture approach to make sure that we have what we need in this country to keep us safe and secure, and also to provide a cleaner, greener alternative energy. So I don't disagree that we can't do a better job with this. We need to. But Mr. Simpson, right now, I have to oppose this amendment. And I really am serious. And I think the gentleman, Mr. Calvert, Mr. Simpson, know this, and others who know me well. We need to get this right, and we need to get it right now. But this isn't the right amendment at the right time. And with that, I yield back.
Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to also speak in support of this amendment. You know, the last few months, the last few years, hopefully have revealed to us as Americans in this country that we need to not be dependent on foreign sources for many different things. We have a critical supply of minerals directly underneath our feet that we should be utilizing ourselves. These minerals are essential to our economy. They're essential to our national security. It makes no sense to depend on foreign sources for these minerals when we have it right here, where we can mine. We can actually, in response to the lady from Minnesota, we can build smelters in this country and do it more responsibly, more safely, more environmentally friendly, utilize better labor practices than anywhere else in the world. You know, the largest hurdle that we face in domestic mineral development is permitting delays. And I've seen it firsthand in the gentlelady's state as well as other states throughout the country. Mining projects to get permitted in the United States can take up to a decade or more, 2 decades, to get a permit. And meanwhile, other countries, other first world countries like like Canada or Australia, they can get a permit approved and moved on within 3 to 5 years. There's no reason that the United States of America, the greatest country in the world, should be beholden to regulatory or permitting delays that preclude us, prevent us from moving forward in ways that we need to in our development, in our national security. So I urge my colleagues to pass this amendment, help support domestic critical mineral development, and vote yes on this amendment. Thank you.
Are there any other members wishing to be heard on the amendment? There's no further debate. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I thank the chairwoman and
Idaho.
Idaho, yeah.
Albert's coming up, isn't
weird
that
looking,
right?
weird looking state up in the Pacific Northwest. Thank you, chairwoman. Yeah, we're getting all the Californians moving to Idaho. I appreciate the comments of everyone. I know everyone is sincere about this.
Albert's next.
Being sincere doesn't solve the problem. I'm as concerned about water as anyone else is. If I didn't think that we could permit these things, it's not just I mean, there's an arbitrary timeline on permitting right now. It's called forever. And that's how long it can take. It generally takes 7 to 10 years to get permitted. It can reduce the value of a mine by 1/3 just by the delays in permitting. We've known this for years. Everybody's known about it. We talked about it for years. But you know what? No is not an answer. We have to do something. If you've got a better solution, let's hear it. All I'm saying is let's reduce the permitting time. And by the way, there is, the text includes a relief valve for more complicated projects. So it's not just a straight 24-month or a 2-year for the environmental impact statements or 18 months for environmental assessments. I guarantee you the federal government can get those done if someone just kicks them in the butt to do it. And that's what this is intended to do. I'm not telling them to approve them or reject them. I'm just saying, get off your duff and get this stuff done because it's critical to our future in this country. As I said, if you got a better solution, let's hear it. Yield back.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Idaho. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. No.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not adopted. A recorded vote is requested. All those in favor, raise your hand.
I got it. So
Hello.
Amadee.
I've got it too here. A sufficient number being in support, recorded vote is ordered. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Adderholt. Mr. Aguilar. Mr. Aguilar votes no. Mr. Amadee. You're muted, sir. Can you unmute?
Mr. Amadee.
still yes.
Mr. Amadee votes aye. Mr. Bishop.
No.
Mr. Bishop votes no. Mrs. Bustos. Mrs. Bustos votes no. Mr. Calvert. Mr. Calvert votes aye. Mr. Carter. Mr. Cartwright. Mr. Cartwright votes no. Mr. Case. Mr. Case votes no. Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark votes no. Mr. Klein. Mr. Klein votes aye. Mr. Cole.
Aye.
Mr. Cole votes aye. Mr. Christ.
No.
Mr. Christ votes no. Mr. Cuellar. Ms. DeLauro.
No.
Ms. DeLauro votes no. Mr. Diaz-Balart. Mr. Diaz-Balart votes aye. Mr. Espaillat.
No.
Mr. Espaillat votes no. Mr. Fleischman.
Aye.
Mr. Fleischman votes aye. Ms. Frankel. Ms. Frankel votes no. Mr. Garcia. Mr. Garcia votes aye. Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Gonzalez votes aye. Ms. Granger. Ms. Granger votes aye. Mr. Harder.
No.
Mr. Harder votes no. Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris votes aye. Ms. Herrera-Butler. Ms. Herrera-Butler votes aye. Mrs. Hinson. Mrs. Hinson votes aye. Mr. Joyce. Mr. Joyce votes aye. Ms. Capter. Ms. Capter votes no. Mr. Kilmer. Mr. Kilmer votes no. Mrs. Kirkpatrick.
No.
Mrs. Kirkpatrick votes no. Mrs. Lawrence.
No.
Mrs. Lawrence votes no. Ms. Lee of California. No. Ms. Lee of California votes no. Mrs. Lee of Nevada. Mrs. Lee of Nevada votes no. Ms. Letlow. Ms. Letlow votes aye. Ms. McCollum.
McCullen votes no.
Ms. McCollum votes no. Ms. Meng?
No.
Ms. Meng votes no. Mr. Molinar? Mr. Molinar votes aye. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse votes aye. Mr. Palazzo?
Aye.
Mr. Palazzo votes aye. Ms. Pingree?
No.
Ms. Pingree votes no. Mr. Pocan? Mr. Pocan votes no. Mr. Quigley?
No.
Mr. Quigley votes no. Mr. Reschenthaler? Mr. Reschenthaler votes aye. Mr. Rogers? Mr. Rogers votes aye. Ms. Roybal Allard? Ms. Roybal Allard votes no. Mr. Ruppersberger? Mr. Ruppersberger votes no. Mr. Rutherford? Mr. Rutherford votes aye. Mr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Ryan votes aye. Mr. Simpson? Mr. Simpson votes aye. Mr. Stewart? Mr. Stewart votes aye. Mrs. Torres?
Torres is aye.
Mrs. Torres votes aye. Mr. Trone?
No.
Mr. Trone votes no. Ms. Underwood? Ms. Underwood votes no. Mr. Valadeo? Mr. Valadeo votes aye. Ms. Wasserman Schultz? Ms. Wasserman Schultz votes no. Mrs. Watson Coleman?
No.
Mrs. Watson Coleman votes no. Ms. Wexton? Ms. Wexton votes no. Mr. Womack? Mr. Womack votes aye.
Does any member wish to record their vote or change their vote? Mr. Cuellar.
Mr. Cuellar votes aye.
Mr. Cuellar votes aye.
Torres votes no.
Mrs. Torres votes no.
Any member wishing to change their vote or to record their vote? Clerk will tally.